Hey there, everybody out there in the YouTubeverse, the Spotify-averse, the TikTok-averse, whoever's listening, wherever you're listening, anywhere across the nation, we're out here raging. Let me tell you right now, this is the Queso You Didn't Know podcast. Obviously, I'm Queso, and as always, joining me is the incomparable.
Toe, Simpson, always and forever.
Now, last time we spoke on a man, Robert Smalls, who was a statesman and a civil rights activist from the 19th century. We're going to go ahead and modernize it a little bit for you, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're giving you Mr. Fred Allen Hampton. Who was he, you ask? Well, he was an American activist and revolutionary socialist. He came to prominence in his late teens and early 20s in Chicago as deputy chairman of the National Black Panther Party and chair of the Illinois chapter. He co-founded the anti-racist, anti-classist Rainbow Coalition, and let's not forget, in 1967, the FBI identified Hampton as a radical threat. It tried to subvert his activities in Chicago, showing disinformation among black progressive groups and placing counterintelligence operatives in the local Panthers organization. In December 1969, Hampton was drugged, then shot and killed in his bed during a pre-dawn raid at a Chicago apartment by a tactical unit of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, who received aid from the Chicago Police Department and the FBI leading up to the attack. Law enforcement sprayed more than 100 gunshots throughout the apartment. The occupants fired once. During the raid, Panther Mark Clark was also killed and several others seriously wounded. In January 1970, the Cook County coroner held an inquest. The coroner's jury concluded that Hampton and Clark's death were justifiable homicides. Yeah, we're going to dive real deep into this one, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by asking Mr. Talberto. I am sure you're aware of this man. Any thoughts?
Uh, I'm glad we got to the Fred Hampton chapter. It's really deserved. It's even somewhat local, because if to know me is to know that I'm a big Midwestern guy, especially when it comes to, I feel, certain Midwestern places, in particular with Chicago. Comparing our cities to houses and shit, Chicago would be next door, or at least a few doors down, or some shit like that. I feel that we have a lot in common in slang and stuff like that. And so just on both ends, regardless, not just as far as obviously that it's a black guy and it's more of a modern story, but I feel that it's somebody who's sort of a local figure.
Whose whole life shook out only 5 hours away from us.
Yeah, and between me and you, I recently saw somebody post that just kind of reflecting on the fact that this man organized gangs, organized people, feared revolutionary and shit like that, all at the age of 21, like a fucking baby, truthfully, what they would call a YN today.
Quite literally, the main motherfucker in the Warriors. Quite fucking literally.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot right there. I'm assuming at least a lot of us know that feeling of being 20, but feeling like you're 300 years old and shit, just from the weight and pressure of life.
Not even old enough to drink, and you're changing the fucking world to the point it still has ripples today.
Yeah, for a fact. And well, yeah, I'm sure the alcohol age was still the same back then, but still, regardless of the fact, like that's young as hell.
Well, I
You
think
know,
I think it might have been 18 at the time still, actually. But for people listening now, put it in that perspective, man. I don't know how old you are out there listening, but imagine you at the age of 20 changing the entire flow of the fucking world. So much so the FBI wants you dead at the age of 20. And to know the revolutionary, we have to know where he started out. I think that's fair, don't you, Alberto?
oh yeah.
Well, Mr. Frederick Allen Hampton Sr. was born on August 30th, 1948, in Illinois. His early life reflected a promising trajectory, initially possessing the skills and aspirations of a professional baseball player. However, his attention shifted decisively toward confronting civil rights issues and improving living conditions for African Americans in his community. Following high school, he pursued pre-law studies at Triton Junior College, attending the institution until 1966. This early academic focus on law and justice foreshadowed his subsequent commitment to challenging academic focus, to challenging systematic oppression, through political organization. Hampton's activism began on a local, intensely practical level. As a young adult, he championed a successful community effort to secure a public swimming pool. Recognizing the need for organized action to effect broader change, he joined the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. His leadership ability was immediately apparent. He rapidly assumed the chairmanship of the NAACP's West Suburban Branch Youth Council. This role established him with a significant platform to work toward tangible goals, such as establishing improved recreational and educational resources for the impoverished Black community in Maywood. The remarkable effectiveness of Hampton's early organization demonstrated a profound level of charismatic leadership and strategic capacity. From a community base of only 27,000 residents, Hampton successfully mustered and led a youth group 500 members strong. This high rate of mobilization indicated that his methodologies, focused on addressing immediate local needs, were exceptionally compelling from the start. This foundation of superior organizational skill, developed during his time with the reformist NAACP, fundamentally contributed to the powerful influence he would later exert. His transition in November 1968 to the Black Panther Party, abandoning a potential career in law in the gradualist approach of the NAACP, marked a conclusion that only revolutionary socialism would effectively dismantle the structural inequities of capitalism and racism in Chicago.
Yeah, it's interesting for me to see just the transformation from something radical, from something considered more conservative, more moderate to the radical path. It's something that really, I feel, it shows the necessity of that. You maybe have seen this book laying around my apartment a few times. It's called Roundabout Midnight, and it was about the Black Power movement and how it was just so effective in every movement, in every aspect of Black liberation in America. It's not something that you can just corner into being something that a few guys walked around in Black militant suits and they just talked about Black power and that's the extent of it. Like, no, from all the way from 1960, and it also showed how unified at one point Blacks really looked at each other globally. When Ghana gained independence, that's something that Blacks revolted about all over the world. Martin Luther King made a statement about it. That's something that we all looked at as being something significant. When Patrice Lumumba died, Black Americans marched on the Capitol here chanting, "Who died for the Black man? Patrice Lumumba, Patrice Lumumba."
And I get what you're saying, because even up until the 90s, Mandela meant something here in America just as much as he did in Africa.
Yeah, so it shows how radical thoughts there's something that have a place, and what's something that shows that better more than the fact that somebody who started off very moderate, so to speak, eventually sat down and said, "Hey, I got to kind of rearrange my thoughts." It's kind of a famous quote now. I'll say that Martin Luther King once said that he integrated his people into a burning house. It basically, later on in his life, he went on to see that maybe he was kind of too passive in certain ways.
That in a way he did kind of admire the Malcolm X approach to certain degrees.
Yeah, things like that.
And I got to say, I really do appreciate you bringing the light, because I feel like with anything in history, people have a tendency to oversimplify. And I think this is a big part where people oversimplify that it wasn't just one small community where this movement was, and it wasn't just the national community where this thing was. It was a global community working on a local level.
And I talked about this before, how, yeah, he advocated for nonviolence, but at the end of the day, he still had the Deacons of Defense, which was basically his armed security for him and his people.
And as you said, it really shows when you see that he went from the NAACP and being sort of moderate in his leanings to, when he joined the Chicago BPP chapter in November 1968, his ascent was immediate and meteoric. And this is still a kid. We're still talking about a kid. He's like you said, barely 20 years old at this point. He quickly rose to prominence, recognized nationally as the deputy chairman of the Black Panther Party and serving as the chairman of the Illinois chapter. He became widely known as Chairman Fred. His leadership was characterized by a commitment to the BPP's survival programs, initiatives designed to meet the immediate needs of the community while simultaneously building political power. Hampton was a principal organizer of these efforts in Chicago, which included establishing the crucial free breakfast program for children. Hampton openly identified as an activist and revolutionary socialist, professing adherence to Marxist-Leninist principles. Come on. His political philosophy was rooted in an anti-racist, class-based analysis that sought to unite the oppressed globally. He famously articulated this belief stating, "We say you don't fight racism with racism. We're going to fight racism with solidarity. We say you don't fight capitalism with no black capitalism. You fight capitalism with socialism." This perspective defined the struggle not merely as a racial conflict, but as a class struggle requiring a unified proletariat regardless of skin color. Hampton's ideological stance positioned him in direct opposition to the American political status quo, particularly what was perceived as state authoritarianism. He considered fascism to be the paramount threat, like it is today, asserting that nothing is more important than stopping fascism because fascism will stop us all. And remember that, people. His economic goals reflected the broader BPP platform, advocating for community control of the means of production if private enterprise failed to ensure full employment for all people. The profound threat Hampton posed stemmed not only from his radical rhetoric, which included confrontational language seized upon by mainstream media to portray the Panthers as a violent street gang, but also from his extraordinary success in operationalizing his ideology. Under his guidance, the Chicago BPP chapter rapidly evolved into a multiracial, anti-imperialist united front that included organizations like the Puerto Rican Young Lords Party and the Revolutionary Youth Movement. This emphasis on a multinational revolutionary alliance connecting domestic struggles to global anti-imperialism intensifies federal surveillance. His leadership demonstrated that he was capable of transforming revolutionary political theory into a successful community reality, making the chapter of an ideological vanguard that directly challenged the nation's economic and foreign policies. The dual strategy of combining radical socialist demands with popular, deniable social services such as the free breakfast program, which fed as many as 20,000 children across the country in 1968 to 69, created a highly resilient movement. These survival programs generated overwhelming community support and goodwill, neutralizing any simple public effort by the state to discredit the BPP as merely a violent criminal enterprise. The sustainable political success of this model likely accelerated the determination by federal agencies to eliminate Hampton physically.
Now, this must be something that was, I guess, it obviously started with the Chicago Panthers, and maybe it was strictly them, because as far as I remember hearing was Huey Newton, those guys, Bobby Seale, they were more so interested in whites can support us but not join us type of thing. And I guess, I mean, from what you're telling me, it doesn't seem like you're saying they officially joined.
They were used for a broader movement in a sense. They weren't necessarily part of the Black Panthers, and you see the Rainbow Coalition is kind of separate from the Black Panthers. That's more so what he was building towards, is that these different chapters of different ideological groups of different races all joined under the flag of the Rainbow Coalition more so than they did the Black Panther movement. It was as if the Black Panthers were working with the Young Lords and not together as one group, if that makes sense.
I get that. That makes sense. You brought up the free breakfast program, of course. Is that something that he directly started? Because I know that was something that Panthers did, period. That's one of their most famous attributes, like guns and the free breakfast program.
I can tell you he led and organized the implementation in Chicago, making it a key part of his work. So at least there, it was definitely on his back, which, as you said, it's because you had these different chapters in different cities all working towards the same goal. So while, let's say it was Huey Newton that thought of it, it was Fred Hampton that implemented it in Chicago, at least.
Right. That's definitely good enough. Like I said, food, shelter, and clothing for the community. Black Panthers, Nation of Islam, RVites, three different ideologies, and they all did that. That's what's really needed in real ideological strategy. That's really working towards something. Just the fact that he was willing to combine with different people of all these different backgrounds and just to see what common ground could be met, and just obviously taking from things like Marx and Lenin and really aiming towards all the real deal overlying social issues.
Exactly, and you're dead on the money there. I think it speaks volumes to his character and his ability as a leader that at 20 years old he saw, hey, they got their boot on all of our necks. We don't necessarily all have to love each other to team up and change this shit.
Right, right.
Even if it's
Yeah,
just the enemy of my enemy is my friend for now, you know?
yeah. I think every person who rises to that level, especially, they know that there's friends and that there is allies, friends, allies, and enemies.
And strength in numbers. If you can get bigger numbers, you go from being, I don't want to say you go from being a movement to a revolution, but you do.
Oh yeah, yeah, for a fact. It's pretty cool, and just hearing something like the Rainbow Coalition mentioned in accordance with the Black Panthers, that it seems kind of contradictory, but good enough truthfully and good enough to go on into.
And I think as you'll see as this plays out, I think a big part of this truly is a man that is using every resource he has to bring about change. That he was an NAACP leader at first, then he became a Black Panther leader, and then he tried to become the leader of something even bigger in a sense. That you're seeing the evolution of someone realizing what strategies work and which ones don't for his particular ideological movement.
And speaking on that, after your next little passage, I want to go into something else, not necessarily a question, but really a thought.
And you really do start seeing this revolution coming forward when we talk about the most significant organizational achievement of Hampton's brief career, which was the founding of the original Rainbow Coalition in 1969. This political organization was a powerful embodiment of his vision of class solidarity, uniting marginalized poor and working class people across ethnic and racial lines in Chicago. Core alliance of the Rainbow Coalition included three distinct groups operating in one of America's most segregated urban centers: the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, the Young Lords organization representing Puerto Rican activists, and the Young Patriots organization, which organized poor white Southern migrants. These groups found common cause in confronting shared structural oppression, focusing their efforts on fighting police brutality, counteracting gentrification, reducing unemployment, and improving public education. They collaborated on survival programs that provided direct community benefits, including health clinics, busing to prisons, and daycare centers. Hampton's genius for unification extended even to the most fractious elements of Chicago's society. He successfully negotiated critical peace pacts among rival Chicago street gangs. The purpose of these alliances was explicitly to end internal violence and redirect the energy, manpower, and organizational structures of these gangs toward organized social change and political activism. The achievement of interracial, cross-class political unity in Chicago posed an existential threat to the existing power structure, which relied on ethnic and racial segregation for stability. The effectiveness of the Rainbow Coalition placed Hampton in direct conflict with the primary objective of the FBI's clandestine COINTELPRO initiative. A March 4th, 1968 memo from FBI Director and ladies' underwear wearer J. Edgar Hoover explicitly stated, look, that's going to be what gets us flagged because I said J. Edgar Hoover liked to cross-dress, which he did, explicitly stated the goal to prevent the coalition of militant black nationalist groups and to prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. Hampton accomplished both the unification of oppressed groups and the establishment of a charismatic leadership role. For the imperialist powers, as noted by the BPP, the unity of black and poor white interests was viewed as the greatest threat to their power, confirming that the elimination of Hampton was deemed necessary to disrupt the burgeoning unity across the color line.
Yeah, and it makes me think because I mean, when you really look at it, somebody like that who has that type of clout, that type of power and wherewithal to cause gang truces to happen and shit like that, you can't help but get pissed off at how somebody who was already such a bright light, already showing such potential at the age of 21, such a giant, such a beautiful flower that hadn't even bloomed nearly halfway yet, to be as poetically corny about it. At the age of 21, he's already taken out. You can't help but be a little perturbed by that, you know? It's really aggravating to think that somebody who could have caused so much positive change in the world, just all because you didn't want to see any cross-racial unity, you decided to see fit to exterminate this man. It's pretty selfish, you know, and pretty piss off worthy, I'll say.
It is. It's disgusting, and it's wrong that you look at it and they operated within the twisted means of the legal system at the time to make it happen. That, as I said, they deemed it justifiable homicide. What is justifiable homicide, bro? That doesn't make sense. Self defense, sure, I get when you say self defense. Justifiable homicide? You are literally saying justifiable murder. That makes no sense. And as you said, a man that even if he was given another 20 years, how different would America be now?
You know, and specifically in Chicago, like a motherfucker that can cause gang truces to happen in Chicago. You know how, of course, I always talk about that in drill music and shit, and how certain gangs, in particular, the GDs and the BDs, will have to do a breakdown on them too, because their gang history is just so infinite. But like the gangster disciples and the black disciples literally existed since the 1960s and shit, you know, like literally around this neck of woods at the time. Like, who's to say that he couldn't have caused them to never really have their beef heat up to the point to where it did, and all the lives that could have been saved from that? Like, I look at so many kids, so many documentaries about kids from Chicago who were gangster disciples or black disciples. Of course, the direct reason of why they was killed, it was because of stuff that had nothing to do with the people who started those gangs directly or anything like that. But just ultimately, if down the line, had those truces happen, I'm sure somewhere down the line, of course, those kids wouldn't feel the need to could one feel the need to go at each other from being from different gangs, because of course that was the somewhat of a catalyst, because a lot of them used to hang out with each other, evident, but later on down the line, evidently, it's like the type of thing, it's a common theme in those type of stories, hang out with each other growing up, and one of them starts hanging or moves over to a place that they rep a certain gang, and the other hangs out with people who, you know, rep another gang, and that kind of splits up, you know.
As you said, I mean, the thousands and thousands of people that could be alive today. You think they said from 2007 to 2011, 13% of all homicides annually were gang related, and those numbers could be non existent thanks to him.
Yeah, it really means a lot when the people trust you, you know.
Especially the way they trusted this young man. And it speaks, like I said, it speaks volumes to his character. The thing I found the most fascinating and most, like, no homo if I have to say it, the most alluring was the cult of personality that this man managed to garner. And as far as greatness goes, like I said, I know I keep teasing that podcast we're going to do one day. But when you want to speak on the level of a great man, it speaks volumes to how you could move mountains to do something this positive and how quickly it shut down. As we said, El Chapo was doing his shit for what, 30 plus years, and it was all evil and despicable. This man had what, 2 good years really throughout his entire career that he got to move mountains.
Yeah, it really kind of brings to light that whole faith the size of a mustard seed can move mountains scripture. You don't have to be a religious motherfucker to know that the Bible says some stuff that correlates well to actual life.
And as you said, you don't have to be a biblical person to understand that those are lessons and those are virtues and those are proverbs that you can take and apply to anything. Faith doesn't have to mean religious.
Oh yeah, for a fact. Like this man, I mean, he obviously had to have some level of faith in what he was doing. I don't think he would have done it otherwise.
And those around him had to have faith in him.
Yeah, for a fact. And that got to do some things. And like we said, man, if only he got 20 more years, hell, maybe even 10. Like so many lives that could have been said.
5 more years even.
It just makes you think like how we talk about how if without Robert Smalls, the song Buffalo Soldiers literally wouldn't even exist. So it's like I talk about how if this guy existed, and it's funny, I didn't even feel comfortable calling him a motherfucker because that's what I usually say to describe somebody, but I don't know, it just seems too great at this point, especially after hyping him up this much. But it's like, so if he got to eventually squash the Gangster Disciple and Black Disciple beef, like somewhere down the line, I'm sure, like, if drill music did still exist, I mean, that's the thing, it probably would Chicago even be violent enough for drill music to be a thing? Because that's what it really centers around, obviously. That's what drill means in their lingo, to kill somebody.
That is an actually very interesting thought that not just Chicago drill music, but how different would gangster rap be altogether if he had lived another 5, 10, 15, 20 years?
You know, just so much that could have been different.
Because you
But
think you give him another 20 years, he's literally in 1989.
like right in the straight out of Compton era, right smack dab in it.
It makes you think. It does. It does. And I mean, they say everything happens for a reason. Sometimes I like to believe that so I don't go insane. But ultimately, man, this only happened to fucking placate rich white men that were high up in status and political power.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you can't help but look at certain things and see that that's not the way it's supposed to be. That's some potential that didn't get fulfilled. It shows that telling the truth literally grows us as people, not just in the figurative sense, but we start to form new genes within our body and our brain structure starts to change when we tell the truth or put ourselves in new positions and new situations that grow us as people. So we're literally studying our growth in the most biological way by deciding to stay in one spot. And that's the same way overall with the entire human experience, really. Like there's some things that you can say, oh, that's just the way it was meant to be in the universe and all this shit. But really, I mean, it's a lot of potential out there that just really didn't get fulfilled in so many circumstances.
And not to be the one to go corny and poetic, but it did make me think of, the whole what happens to a dream deferred in a way.
I mean, that's real shit, you know what I mean? Dries up like a raisin in the sun, like one of the most infamous lines ever.
And I can't help but feel like it's very apropos to this situation.
Like those words are famous for a reason. It's like those famous one-liners. That's his whole version of the whole is the East and Juliet is the sun and some shit. Yeah.
Right, without a doubt. And as we were saying, this whole situation arises because you had rich white men in power that didn't like what was happening, as you'll see with the Federal Bureau of Investigation identifying Fred Hampton as a radical threat by 1967. The counterintelligence operation against the Illinois BPP was methodical, relying heavily on infiltration and sabotage to achieve the mandate laid out by COINTELPRO. Central to the conspiracy was William O'Neill, also known by the alias William Hart. O'Neill was an FBI operative active between 67 and the 70s, whose primary function literally was to infiltrate the BPP. He successfully gained Hampton's trust, ascending to the sensitive position of Hampton's personal bodyguard and chief of security. O'Neill reported to FBI agent Roy Mitchell, who was recognized within the Bureau for his skill in cultivating informants in politically sensitive areas. The critical operational step came when O'Neill acquired and transmitted a detailed floor plan of the BPP apartment at 2337 West Monroe Street, explicitly marking Hampton's bedroom. The reconnaissance information was swiftly passed by Agent Mitchell to the office of Cook County State's Attorney Edward Hannaran, providing local law enforcement with the exact tactical intelligence required for a successful targeted pre-dawn assault. The operation against Hampton was distinguished by its premeditation, which sought to guarantee his incapacitation before the assault. On the evening of December 3rd, 1969, after Hampton finished teaching a political education course at a local church, William O'Neill completed his final act of treachery. He slipped a powerful sleeping drug, identified as barbiturates, into Hampton's drink. O'Neill then departed the apartment. The chemical incapacitation was designed to ensure the 21-year-old chairman, Fred, would be soundly asleep and rendered completely defenseless during the subsequent raid. The pre-dawn raid was ordered by State's Attorney General Edward Hannaran, utilizing a tactical unit composed of plainclothes police officers attached to his office, demonstrating the seamless coordination between federal intelligence gathering and local law enforcement execution. This reliance on drugging, followed by a tactical raid, establishes the event as a planned elimination rather than a reactive law enforcement operation. The fate of the infiltrator William O'Neill provided a dark historical coda to the COINTELPRO operation. After his role was publicly revealed in 73, he was placed under federal witness protection. He secretly returned to Chicago in 1984, but on the night the documentary series Eyes on the Prize aired an episode discussing his role, O'Neill died by suicide on January 15, 1990. Though the state granted him legal immunity, O'Neill was ultimately unable to escape the psychological toll of his betrayal.
Yeah, that's a hell of a lot. I like how you mentioned the COINTELPRO because it kind of brings to mind for me something that they mentioned in their outlines. They go out their way to talk about how the thing that they look at as being dangerous, if I'm not wrong, the most dangerous to the state of American society, they say, is the rise of a Black Messiah type of figure. And if Fred Hampton wasn't that, I really don't know what he is.
And it speaks volumes to all the other funny deaths that take place during the civil rights era. We know who did them all. We know who killed everyone. And you can put whatever story or spin you want on it, man. Come on. The CIA has actively fucking overthrown governments around the world 50 times over that we know of. What are they doing in our own backyard?
Yeah, it's a hell of a thing because yeah, there's some motherfuckers who, of course, work in those departments who are just everyday people doing their job. Overall, when it comes to organizations like that, you just know that there's some shiesty shit going on at some level, you know?
Well, and even saying they're ordinary people doing a job, not to make that comparison, I know it's been done to death, and judge me for it if you want. The Nazis, a lot of times, were just ordinary people doing their jobs. There was a term coined when they took Eichmann to trial, the banality of evil, that when you see someone that led the Nazi regime, you expect a monster, and instead you get a boring, middle aged white man that looks like a paper pusher.
Yeah, there's a reason why you see people like that. People who never consider themselves being monsters, who end up doing monstrous shit. Even soldiers who end up doing some shit. The stories get deep as far as that goes. And in a lot of cases, they never I mean, it's really because they don't identify themselves as being monsters, overall, really. They
It,
don't really themselves as that.
like the Joker thinks he's the hero, as we said before, right?
Yeah.
I do have a question for you though, because, and I'm remiss to say, I'll be honest, I didn't do enough digging into William O'Neill than the surface level things. I have to ask you, in your opinion, then, what makes a young black man turn on someone like Fred Hampton the way he did?
I mean, really, it's the disease that white supremacy has infected on all of us. And I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent for a minute. But for example, we just spoke about how for the Native Americans, there was some of them who, like I called them Indian coons, Native American coons. They were more supportive of the white idea of beauty. We just did a story about that. Do you remember that not too long ago? Yeah, things like that. Over in India, I'm sure you know there's people from India, there's Indians who are legit darker than me, have the same facial features and shit, basically everything. Wide nose, thick lip, the whole 9 yards. So in a lot of times, and it's even been talked about how they, for their advertisements, they really like to show the more lighter skinned Indian as opposed to the ones who really make up the majority of them, if we're being honest, the ones who look like me, if not darker and shit. You know what I mean? And the colorism over in India is heavy, like to say the least. And people kind of talk about how some Asian Americans are kind of getting their wake up call to racism in a way, and how Asian Americans have always been looked at as the good minority, the well behaved minority, and shit like that. I seen people making little video clips and shit like that talking about how they believe Asians are getting a wake up call, but that's neither here nor there. I'm not saying I really believe that's the truth necessarily, but I know that, I mean, not even it's a good chance. I'm going to be real. Of course, there's nothing against Asians as a whole. I mean, don't have to say that, but there are some who really have a nasty attitude, in particular towards blacks. Just, I forgot to mention how there's even been statistical evidence that shows that when it comes to online dating, not just black women, but minority women of all, non-white races, that when a white guy messages them, they're going to respond faster than when a guy of their own race messages them. It's like the illusion of the superiority of whiteness has really affected us all, basically.
I think that's a I think that's a very fair point. I was just curious. Do you know how he committed suicide?
How would that be?
He ran into traffic on the 290 in Chicago, ran into traffic on the highway, and just, kind of let himself be run over by cars going 80 miles an hour. And the comparison they made for it in the research I did, and tell me if this is a fair statement, that he was the Judas to the Black Messiah.
Oh yeah, you can definitely say that. I don't know. Part of me just think that's somewhat, I mean, not even somewhat, that's seeking attention, because why go out that painfully? Like, you want to get ran over? Like, I
You
don't
could
know.
take pills, you could shoot yourself, you could hang yourself, anything, right? That is a
Yeah,
very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Theatrical way to do it.
yeah. I mean, really, just drug yourself the same way you drugged Fred Hampton. I mean, overall, and it, I love how you brought up Mr. Hoover, not Larry, but J. Edgar, and yeah, that's have you ever seen, I think I have seen that photo, that the mafia kept on him, which is why he never acknowledged the existence of them, because they had that on his ass. But I mean, it's funny because it still came out later on down the line. But yeah, they threatened to let those pictures out and just let that information out, from what I hear.
Man, and it almost makes you wish Fred Hampton had those same pictures, I'll tell you that much.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And sadly, though, Fred Hampton didn't have those pictures. So a coordinated assault began approximately 4:30 a.m. on December 4th, 1969. What makes this abundantly sadder to me is his son, the only heir to the Hampton, wasn't born until December 21st of the same year. So, 14 plainclothes Chicago police officers traveling in an unmarked vehicle disguised as a utility truck descended upon the apartments at 2337 West Monroe Street. The officers were heavily armed, carrying pistols, a shotgun, and a submachine gun because, you really got to go all out when you're playing the villain, I guess. Upon kicking down the front door, the officers immediately opened fire. Mark Clark, who was on guard, was shot once in the chest and killed. The resulting death spasm caused Clark to accidentally fire his own shotgun once towards the ceiling, which forensic evidence later confirmed was the sole shot fired by any member of the Black Panther Party during the entire raid. Despite this minimal return fire, the police unleashed an overwhelming volley, firing between 90 and 100 bullets throughout the apartment. The onslaught critically wounded 4 other Black Panther members who were inside. During the initial barrage, Fred Hampton lay unconscious from the drugs in his bed next to his fiancée, Deborah Johnson, who was nearly 9 months pregnant with their son, Fred Hampton Jr. When the heavy gunfire ceased, Hampton was found to be injured but still alive. The subsequent actions of the officers confirmed the mission's objective was execution. Police forcibly removed Deborah Johnson, who had been attempting to shield Hampton with her body, and dragged her into an adjacent room. From there, Johnson heard a conversation among the officers. One officer asked if Hampton was still alive. Following this query, 2 distinct gunshots were heard inside the bedroom, and another officer confirmed the successful elimination. He's good and dead now. Subsequent investigation and autopsy confirmed that Hampton had been shot twice in the head at close range. The nature of the incapacitation, the drugging, and at close-range shots after finding him wounded definitively categorized the act as a political execution, not a shootout or accidental homicide.
Man,
Does it get your blood boiling too when you hear this shit?
yeah, it's not surprising, but it still has little elements of shock. I'll put it like that. See, to do something like that, well, first of all, I kind of want to travel back to what you said because it brings up how these guys definitely aren't people who are just dilly-dallying, who are just cops on the trying to make a living. They really have an initiative in their heart that they use via their job, via their gun and badge to get Fred Hampton and people like Fred Hampton out of the picture, or at least sustain them to a certain degree. And those CIA people, you don't think, well, I don't want to go off on that tangent and kind of get off subject, but you don't think that there's some people who, at least in that field, who do shit that isn't vindictive in any way?
Oh, I guarantee you they do vindictive shit and they love it. I guarantee you some of those motherfuckers are pure sadists that just want to see the world burn. And it's sort of like, would you rather have the psychopath on the street doing a bunch of fucking serial killing, or would you rather put a badge on him and have him work for you? I think that's how they see a lot of these guys. And I guarantee you it was petty, it was vindictive, because essentially if it wasn't a petty vindictive thing, he would have been taken out in cuffs and thrown in prison and they'd have slapped charges on him. They wanted him dead.
Oh, yeah, for a fact. For a fact. Yeah, that's something I want to do a deep dive into, just the CIA and shit like that. But the fact that this man died on the day Jay-Z was born, I think that's something of interest.
That is a little wild when you think about it, isn't it?
Yeah, December 4th, 1969. It just shows, first of all, how much of an elder he was. Like, of course, 21 years older than Jay-Z. That's some years right there. That's some years.
Still, to put it in perspective, he'd only be 66 today, right? Something around there.
He was
1969.
Yeah.
Or 71, 60 or 70 something. No, he'd be 70 something, right? I mean, he'd still be alive. That's the crazy thing to think about is if he ate good and he took care of himself, motherfucker would still be living and breathing to this day.
Oh yeah, for a fact. It would
He'd be close to Danny Trejo's age if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it'd definitely be a treat to see him interact and still influence people the way he did then with the internet and shit.
Hell, he could have been the first black president the way he was moving mountains.
Oh, yeah. I mean, who knows, really? I mean, if Jesse Jackson could have damn near got it, I don't put it past Fred Hampton, truthfully.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. It just, I also, part of me wonders, because it sounds like they pretty much went to kill everybody in that room. Do you think it was just Fred Hampton was the prime target and that's why they let his wife live? Do you think they thought nobody would believe him? That was something I've been curious about too, because doing the research, you find about 1,000 different ways they justified it, but it almost makes you wonder why let her live then. Not that I'm saying it's a bad thing. Thank God they did, because her son went on to become a bit of an activist like his father, which, I guess that's the best you can hope for in that situation. But at the same time, why do you think they let her live?
I mean, if I'm being real with you, because she was pregnant, I mean, even in those times, to kill a pregnant lady that was black, it still would have got a lot of heat. It still would have got a lot of heat. That really would have been something that would have got people's attention. So this is something. I mean, it was already blindingly obvious that that shit was an execution anyway. But that shit, I think that probably would have put the extra stamp on it for people to be like, no, this is. Sometimes it only takes one thing, even though it's a mountain of things on top of it that are already wrong. It just takes one thing for people to be like, okay, this is something that we have to have a certain perception about now. We can't look at this as being okay, you know?
It's one thing to say Fred Hampton was in a quote unquote, as they call the Black Panthers, a violence gang. It's another thing to kill a pregnant woman. I get what you're saying. In a sense, she'd be a bigger martyr than Fred ever was.
Yeah, like y'all killed a fucking pregnant chick. Like, nah, that definitely wouldn't have been too good for him. And if I'm being real, I've always been able to give people credit on them being at least somewhat intelligent, even if I don't like them per se. And like, yeah. I think they were a little smart. They were smart enough to know that killing a pregnant chick was not going to be the best press. I mean, that wasn't going to be something they would have gotten away with as easy, probably.
And you raise a very good point that I know the way you study history as well as I do. A hateful, smart person is one of the most dangerous you can find.
Oh, and just shout out to her, truthfully, for, enduring that shit and really still looking out for Fred Hampton while she was carrying his child, in the midst of a bunch of gunfire.
Speaks volumes to her character. I know we said this corny shit before, but man, you really do see there's a lot of great men that have great women, and I think that really shows it right there.
Oh, yeah, damn straight. And speaking of great women, that kind of leads perfectly into Asada Shakur. This is really reminiscent of her story. I know you probably heard about her recently dying and, really got to live out her days in Cuba and die peacefully.
And that's all you can ever hope for, I guess,
Yeah.
especially given the life that she had to live in the beginning of it.
Yeah, I mean, not even just speaking of him like Castro. You talking about a motherfucker who was the U.S. tried to kill this motherfucker over 600 times, and still got to live out his days and die on his terms.
Isn't that wild when you put it in that perspective, though, that 600 times you couldn't kill this man, but the first time you aimed for Fred Hampton, you pulled it off. God damn it. Sometimes the world works in a weird fucking way.
Yeah, and the thing is, they had to really try again. I mean, he was injured at first. It's not they kind of had to have their hand held to do that. They had to do that shit at close range.
To a drugged man, like, yeah, it does. It makes your blood boil a little bit because it's like, come on, man. Come on. Y'all had to, it's like, you remember the bit, man, we beat his ass. I hope you did. There was 5 of you. Y'all jumped him. It's kind of the same thing. Like, man, we took him out. Well, I hope so, man. You had him drugged on barbiturates and we're standing a foot away from him.
Right, right, right. And just as far as the shit that they did to cover it up, or at least try to, I
And
mean, it's just, I'm really just interested in seeing how far they went because I knew it was some far-flung shit personally.
And it isn't some new shit. As we said with the Tulsa massacre and shit, man, America has a funny way of trying to sweep things they don't want you to hear under the rug. Immediately following the assassinations of the 21-year-old Hampton and 22-year-old Mark Clark, and that's the other thing, people, to really put this in perspective. None of these men were old men. None of these men had made it even close to middle age. These were even William O'Neill was about 20 at the time, man. These were children, essentially. So Cook County State's Attorney Edward Hannaran led the effort to control the narrative. Hannaran publicly claimed the incident was a violent shootout, stating that police action was a response to the extreme viciousness of the Black Panther Party. You know, the ones that started the free lunch program? Yeah. The surviving seven Panthers were subsequently arrested and indicted by a grand jury on severe charges, including armed violence and attempted murder of police officers. However, the objective findings of the ballistics report ultimately served as a definitive witness against the state's conspiracy. The discovery that the police had fired 90 to 100 bullets, while the BPP had returned only one shot, provided overwhelming physical evidence that shredded the official narrative. This factual disparity was the critical turning point that forced authorities to eventually drop all criminal charges against the survivors.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll say about America, we have what they say is the only justice system that's fair. You know, once it becomes clear that certain things are bullshit in an American court, and not even in American court, once it becomes clear that certain things are just incapable of logic to authorities, period, it just becomes really impossible to move forward with anything else. It's like, okay, let's drop this. Even clearly how Black people had it fucked up at that time, how injustice just prevailed at that time, it still was a certain point to where, certain bullshit just couldn't reign.
And they had to know, too, the other beauty of it is you're talking about a chapter of the Black Panther Party in Chicago that literally changed the whole landscape of Chicago at the time. I truly believe another reason why it was dropped from the reading I did is the fact they knew if we take this to court, who in the world is going to convict these people? Who in this city actually is going to stand by and watch these people go to prison after everything they did good?
Yeah, you know what I mean? That's really telling. And we always talk about how these days your frontal lobe doesn't even fully develop until 25. Like, these are the people whose brains weren't even fully formed, just making the world shift, you know?
Exactly. Like you said, I mean, 21 when he was, let's be fair, he had only been 21 like 3.5 months. He was barely 21 when he died. To have the radar on you the way he did, to have the fucking the scope pointed at you the way he did, it's very telling, as we've said many times on this, and it just makes you think. Like you said, if he was alive 20 more years, it sucks that America, for all the things you can say good and bad about it, one of the things you definitely can say is they don't take change very well.
Yeah, man, and thankfully, I'm not gonna lie, it really has a lot to do with situations. Like you said, greatness that is really situational at times, or a lot of times, really. And the American economy, how it was for a certain period of time, all the way up until sort of recently, it just provided a certain level of comfort it just provided a certain level of comfort for people to experience, to where they weren't financially bound down to where, like a lot of people are in other nations, to where they have the freedom to think, what about my social liberties and shit like that, and they have the angst and the energy to fight for those.
Without a doubt. Yes, I think that's 100% on the money. And it sucks to see a man like him have the legacy ended so abruptly the way he did. But not that it makes it any better. Let's talk about the path to accountability. It was very protracted and arduous. Despite the compelling evidence, an inquest held January 1970, as we said, initially ruled the deaths of Hampton and Clark justifiable homicide, which, yet again, fucking insane. What does that even mean? A justified murder? No, sir. The finding was discredited only when the overwhelming ballistic evidence became public, leading to the dismissal of the charges against the surviving Panthers. The family of Hampton and Clark, along with the survivors of the raid, pursued a lengthy civil rights and wrongful death lawsuit against Chicago and the federal government. After a 13-year legal battle, the case concluded in 1982 with a massive settlement of $1.85 million paid to the 9 plaintiffs. The substantial payment was divided equally among the 3 government entities, which each contributed $616,333. While the Justice Department attorney insisted that the settlement did not constitute a formal admission of legal wrongdoing, the plaintiff's legal counsel, G. Flint Taylor, stated unambiguously that the payment represented an admission of the conspiracy that existed between the FBI and Hannah men to murder Fred Hampton. The magnitude of the financial cost, shared across federal and local jurisdictions, solidified the judicial acknowledgement that the event was a coordinated state-sanctioned political elimination. Fred Hampton's life was tragically cut short at the age of 21. However, the brutality and obvious premeditation surrounding his death, coupled with the exposure of the elaborate government conspiracy, transformed him into a powerful symbol. Historians, including Michael Newton, now widely concur that Hampton was murdered in his sleep by Chicago police with FBI collusion. Hampton's enduring philosophical legacy is captured in the revolutionary axiom, you can kill the revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution. The state's effort to halt the movements by eliminating its leaders ultimately backfired, transforming Hampton into a martyr whose political vision gained lasting power precisely because of the ruthlessness of his assassination. His model of multiracial, class-based organizing through the Rainbow Coalition continues to serve as an impactful blueprint for activists and political organizers seeking to bridge ethnic and economic divides.
Yeah, it's always interesting how they find to basically admit through payments that of course can't fully repay anything, but they come too late.
Without a doubt. And I mean, not to be that fucked up guy, because yeah, these guys are put in jail. They were threatened to be thrown in prison for life and all this. But ultimately, 7 out of the 9 got a good decent trade-off, that they didn't go to prison and they got money they deserved for what they went through. But those 2 other families, it's not bringing Clark and Hampton back ever.
Not at all. At the very least, we can say that his death symbolized something, as much powerful things as he could have done. The fact that he needed to be taken out by the government's eyes, that shows something powerful as well. Just the symbolism of that. It just screams the whole, you can kill the revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution, It just screams that whole philosophy, because truthfully, there's been at least a few people since Fred Hampton was unfortunately took from us who have the potential to be influenced by him and likely have.
And it speaks volumes that a man whose life was cut short at 21 is still just as powerful as he is at death. That you think about all of the people we've ever talked about on the podcast so far, and quite honestly, let's be real, going forward in the future, everyone will ever discuss. This is by far, if not the youngest, probably going to be the youngest man who, his entire life we told on a podcast, who only had 21 years on this earth. And in those 21 years, you can arguably say he did more for his community and change as a whole for the nation than a lot of these guys we'll cover could do in 60, 70, 80 years.
Oh, yeah. Like you said, I mean, truthfully, he had way more experience with being 20 than 21. Like you said, only for 3 months. Like, for me, that's June of 2016. Like, that's when I think about myself in June of 2016, I wasn't even close to being where I'm at now as far as my personality and stuff like that. Imagine he definitely could have transformed into something. I don't think we could really grasp it unless we had a chance to see it. It's just one of those things that we should have seen.
That in another universe, they have the best timeline because they got to watch this man grow old.
Oh, yeah, for a fact.
And I'll hit that little Springer moment. The life of Fred Hampton, though tragically short, stands as a testament to radical organizational genius and uncompromising political vision. The detailed evidence compiled regarding his activities confirms his rapid transformation from an exceptionally capable NAACP youth leader into the chairman of the Illinois Black Panther chapter, a position he leveraged to construct the groundbreaking anti-classist Rainbow Coalition. By successfully forging alliances across racial lines, bringing together Black, Puerto Rican, and poor white activists, and uniting rival street gangs under a banner of socialist class solidarity, Hampton created a unified front. We can say a threat too, technically, because man, did the U.S. government not like him. But he created a unified front that the U.S. federal government, through COINTELPRO, deemed an intolerable threat to internal stability. The subsequent destruction of Hampton was a meticulous, multi-layered conspiracy, distinguished by the calculated use of betrayal, chemical incapacitation, and political coordination between the FBI, the state's attorney's office, and the Chicago Police Department. The forensic evidence, particularly the ballistic report, showing an overwhelming police advantage, and the testimony regarding the close-range execution of the unconscious leader unequivocally classified the event as an assassination. While initial legal efforts failed to secure criminal indictments for the officers involved, the eventual $1.85 million civil settlement paid jointly by federal and local entities served as a powerful, delayed acknowledgement of government conspiracy and wrongdoing. Hampton's legacy remains defined by his structural critique of power, his innovative model of internet ethnic solidarity, and his martyrdom, which cemented his place in history as a revolutionary figure whose ideas proved impossible to kill. This is going to conclude our episode on Fred Hampton, and hopefully you guys go and look him up and find books on him and read more, because Lord knows there's a lot more than we could fit in this short podcast. He is a figure that everyone should know about, that schools should teach, and I hope this podcast really opened your eyes to a figure that sadly, tragically, is lost to more people than you'd think in this time. And his anti-fascist statements hold as true today as they did then. Any closing thoughts, anything you'd like to plug, anything you'd like to shout out, or anything at all, Mr. Telberto?
I'm definitely glad we got to go Black Panthers with this one, and why not start with Fred Hampton? Why, just a hell of a story to open up that chapter with, and it shows people that we're producing what we preach. We said not too long ago Fred Hampton would come, and believe the cheese. Other than that, just, look a guy up on YouTube and shit and Instagram and all that good shit. Buy my tasty novel once it drops, hopefully next year. And yeah, we'll be back at you folks.
What's that Insta handle?
All the Instagram, TOLBERT Simpson, and that's where you'll find me. Hit a guy up. I talk back always.